Hello, it is January 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and that means it's time for another episode of Clean Talk Live, coming to you from the beautiful Seal Shield Studios in downtown Orlando, Florida, where it is warm and sunny on a January afternoon. Very excited to have you join us today for my very special guest and old friend, Mr. Scott Filion. Scott is the Chief Commercial Officer at Seal Shield. And full transparency for our guest, Scott, but we've been friends and colleagues for 30 years, if you can believe that. Sorry to kick things off, making you feel old. Welcome to Clean Talk.
Well, thank you, Bradley. I'm honored to be here. I'm a big fan of the show, so I really appreciate it. Thank you. We'll overlook the 30-year part. I just say for a long, long time, really first job out of college for me. So I do have one quick disclaimer here. If anyone doesn't like today's show, please let Stephanie Caraway know. She was actually our scheduled guest today. She's an infection preventionist out of Moffitt. But unfortunately, with the huge rises in the new COVID cases, her schedule's full for the unforeseeable future. But we'll get her back here on a future show, and hopefully I can help entertain you.
Yes, we'll have Stephanie back on a future show. But today we're here to talk about you, Scott, and your observations in the industry as it relates to some of the greatest changes that have come into effect as a result of COVID-19. But before we get started, let's give a little background, Scott. You mentioned that we started our career together in the early 90s. Why don't you tell our guests how we got to know each other, where we met, and how we started this industry together?
Yeah, neat. Bradley and I, 30-something years ago, actually it was in, I think, 1992, we worked for a little company called Tech Data in the time, and they were just, at that point, we were part of when they hit their first $1 billion, I think. But this was a distributor, and I always love to tell the story how I first I knew of Bradley, and I'm sure he knew of me, but we had met one morning when they were doing the Howard Franklin over down in Tampa, if anyone remember those days. And you either went in at the crack of dawn, or you sat in traffic all morning every day to get to try to commute from Tampa over to Clearwater. And so we would go in, and they had a workout facility, racquetball, and we established quite the relationship, and we would a friendship, and we'd play racquetball and have breakfast all before work would even start. But the way I met him is you'd come in, and it was this huge building with no lights would come on until 7 o'clock, but we were there well before. And being in distribution, there were tons of products that would be on back order. And what we would do is we'd come in and work the inventory at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And one morning I come in, and what you're doing is you're trying to get inventory before the rest of the company comes in. So they'd have inventory come into their West Coast warehouses, and we'd come in and move all of our product or our orders underneath those allocated warehouses to get the inventory. So I didn't realize that anybody else in the company had even knew the little trick that I was doing. But one morning I come in, place is completely black. There's 500 reps working for Tech Data at the time, and there's one cubicle on way across the building. Sure enough, I walk over and it's him, and he's got his back order report out, and I had mine, and the friendship started. So that was a long time ago. We've since our careers have paralleled for a number of years, ended up in DC, and our friendship even flourished there. I introduced him to his wife. He tells that story a little differently, but
That's true.
Yeah. And then I was fortunate in 2006 when you started this endeavor, sir, that I answered your call. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. I have a little different recollection on that early morning. I remember that I was alone in the building, and all of a sudden some big dude came up and started threatening me for taking all the inventory in the dark. I'm looking around all alone. How's this going to go down? But we've developed quite a friendship and respect for each other over the years. And that's why when I founded Seal Shield, Scott was the first guy that I reached out to. And I'm glad that you accepted the challenge. And it's been 15 years now that we've been working together at Seal Shield. And we've certainly had our ups and downs. It's been an exciting ride. And Really, it's never been more important, our mission at Seal Shield, than it is now during COVID-19. And that's what we're here to talk about, some of the changes and challenges that COVID-19 has presented in the IT and healthcare industries. And Scott, you are really an industry expert, been in the field for a long time now, well respected in the industry and in IT and healthcare, and very interested. I'm sure our guests are interested to get your perspective on how the business has evolved and the changes you've seen as a result of COVID. And I think we're calling this the top five changes related to COVID-19. So I'll throw you the first one. Scott, I know you're a road warrior. We all know that travel has changed tremendously as a result of the pandemic. A lot of people haven't been traveling. Some people have started traveling again. How has COVID-19 affected your travel schedule? And would love to hear more about your experiences traveling the world during this pandemic.
Well, great question. It is definitely, one of the biggest things. It's certainly changed, but in the beginning, obviously, it completely stopped. It didn't stop for us long, though, because Seal Shield was really part of the nation's response to the COVID pandemic. So it wasn't very long. We had to get back out and move. So, as you say, though, being a road warrior, and so geographically it's necessary. I live in New Hampshire. My office is out of Orlando, and we're, for the most part, a virtual company. So we travel all over the space and on a normal basis. But what happened when COVID hit? Obviously, it all shut down. There were times in the beginning I'm the only guy in the airport other than the cleaning people, and Bill Bramblett, of course, our VP of sales. He never stopped. He was a robot through the whole thing, and he was a central worker if there ever was one. But it's really, slowly over that first year, you could travel, but there was nowhere to travel to. The folks that needed to see you were just swamped in their responses, under lockdowns. Everybody's been where it was under lockdown the first 6-8 months. But the places that needed to see you the most, you couldn't get in and talk to them anyway. But as it returned in the next year, we have seen the world kind of have the back to work initiatives and back to school initiatives and try to return to some type of a new normalcy. I think in the beginning, we all were hoping we'd get back to normal. And then you realize somewhere you get that epiphany that it's never going to be completely normal again. Some of these changes are staying with us forever, and rightfully so. But you have to adjust, and you make those big steps in your mind that or hurdles that you gotta get over. But this last year, it has opened up traveling, and we were able to do a couple of the big healthcare shows. I was fortunate enough to travel to Dubai, and I say they really had their act together early on. The folks over in Dubai and the Kalman, the people that put on that show, everything from attendee PCR testing on site, the safety protocols that they put in place. They really, they went out of their way to make you feel safe and welcome you back as a traveler. And we saw a lot of the same kind of stuff out in New Orleans at HIMSS. I feel like the people that are out there able to get out there, they've been dying to, and they realize the risks involved. So your safety is at people's forefront. And so as traveling has changed, I missed it for a little bit, but I think we all adapted and we all got better and more efficient at what we do. So I don't know if I'm ever going to hit those 200 nights a year again, but it is nice to be back out on the road, and I'm looking forward to some of our events coming up here in Florida this year.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to start traveling again, and I'm sure many of them want to. I'm wondering if you have any tips for anybody. Let me ask you, are you a Do you fly a particular airline, or have you noticed any changes with your preferred travel partners that you might want to share with our audience?
I have, and or I do use a preferred airline. I'm a Delta guy. And I can say I'm really proud of what Delta did. And this isn't an advertisement for them, but they kept the separations on the planes, even post their commitment to do that when the Southwests of the world and everyone else started selling every seat. They really held to that. They did put a good portion of a new fleet into I guess service this year. But for me, it kind of goes back to the same common sense messages. I think you had a guest, or we had a guest, Dave Johnson, recently on, and he just talked about, trying. We all know the common sense stuff, and you're required to wear that mask on the plane, but no one's making you wash your hands, or no one's where they should be, and no one's keeping you out of someone's face. But I think if we just all realize and do the things that we can do, it overall cumulatively will help us in the greatest.
Well, you talked about traveling for trade shows and some of the things that have been put in place to make attendees feel safer. You mentioned Dubai. Any other experiences at other trade shows? What are the kind of things that the trade shows are doing so that they can open up again and make people feel safe?
Yeah, so Freeman is a one of the trade show support agents that put on these large shows. So we've been actually Seal Shield has been working closely with them. To actually integrate our type of solutions into their peace of mind offerings at some of these shows. But before I get into that, I'll say, typically to go to like a HIMSS type of event, they're requiring that you're vaccinated. You have to require proof. Out at the event in Las Vegas, they made it very easy by employing Clear. So you can load all your vaccination information into your Clear app. It's already uses you as your identifier. So that was really neat. I'd love to see that in place. The mask requirements, spacing, all of those requirements, they're trying to follow the ever-changing CDC guidelines. But what we were able to help them do is, one of the biggest cross-contaminators in a healthcare space or really in the world is the mobile device that goes with you everywhere. This even goes into the restroom with you. And sorry, if it's a doctor, it's going into the OR with you and stuff. And we're continually walking around with this type of an electronic that you cannot put a bleach, or you can't, throw in your dishwasher and clean this thing like you can the keyboard, or Seal Shield keyboards. But that we Seal Shield makes a UV disinfectant for electronics. So what we did with the HIMSS and the Freeman organizations is we set up disinfection stations across the entire floor plan. So any of the entries, the exits, you could come in, they'd have a hand washing system. You could disinfect your tablet or your phone and then move through. So it was neat. It was a neat added addition for all of the attendees. And, as everything moves away from a physical hand with the, handing someone a business card at one of those trade shows, it's all going to this. And again, we got to clean them. So.
Well, it's great that the trade shows are putting in practices and policies that can make us get together again safely. I know that I've enjoyed being able to get out a little bit last year to some of the trade shows with the safety procedures in place that you just mentioned. How, in your experience, has that differed from customer interfacing? So you have a lot of direct interface with our customers, many healthcare customers. What is the experience like, I guess, versus having the trade show procedures in place and getting ready to being able to move forward with trade shows? Have you been able to get out in front of customers? What kind of activities are you seeing the customers doing to address the challenges of COVID-19?
Yeah, great question. There's a huge migration towards the Zoom and the webinars in terms of, information gathering. Some of that travel and those types of, kind of tech fairs, and we're replacing them with virtual events. And I can say as a vendor or a manufacturer of solutions, it's tough to do some of those. It's tough to get that message across always virtually. But we're getting better at doing that, and like any type of a change in a technology, or there's opportunity there to be better than your competition. But some of the traditional stuff for us for travel around this type of or in a normal year would be doing technology refreshes, going in there, doing maintenance on some of the EC solutions. There's just continual work that's always happening in a healthcare system that really, since the outbreak of the pandemic, they are 100% in a response to the pandemic. You go into a hospital today, and the nurse that may be treating you, she wasn't trained for that, or he wasn't trained for that. They're really just overstaffed and focusing on one, that response and by priority. So, as we saw when the first, response to the pandemic hit last March, Seal Shield's business, we shot up. People used our products. They needed our products for their first emergency response centers. But what happened when you look at it throughout time, when that huge spike that we had was also leveled off because you lost all that regular residual business that you constantly got on, because you're out there doing the tech refreshes and solution installs. So,
and we've seen this, many of our partners have experienced this since we're so involved in the healthcare community. Obviously, priorities have taken place. They have to treat their patients. And because they are so overtaxed and understaffed, they just really, not only do they not have the bandwidth to be meeting with vendors and dealing with IT issues, it's just not safe, right? They don't want people coming in that aren't essential. And so that poses some challenges. We're talking about healthcare, but we actually have a question here, Scott, from Dr. Norman Horn, who asks, he says, historically, healthcare have been the primary consumer of infection control products. What other industries are now adopting infection control technology in the wake of the pandemic? Can you reply?
Yes, great question, Dr. Horn. Everybody, oh my word, I feel like the healthcare concerns around cross-contamination, the whole world is finally starting to understand and get that concept. And I mean, some of the biggest markets for you, doctor, are, the education space. We've seen a huge, outreach and outcry to try to protect the kids, and really anywhere where we are still needing to get together as a community, there are infection control concerns. And so we've really, Brad came in, I think at one point in early part of the pandemic and said, I told you I could not be wrong for 14 straight years in a row. And he was right. He was right, and he was no longer wrong. So I think the world finally is paying attention. They're wearing their masks. They're washing their hands at a level they've never had, and they can still do a lot better, though.
Well, that's right, Scott. For 14 years, we've been saying that another pandemic is inevitable. You only have to be a student of history to know that this has been happening since the beginning of recorded history. And with the changes in the global economy and travel in the world getting smaller, it was inevitable that something like this would happen at some point. And I'll go ahead and say that it's inevitable that it will happen again. And let's make sure we're ready for it next time, and that we've learned the lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic. We talked about travel and trade shows and interfacing with customers, but it's been well publicized. We've certainly experienced it. We've had Scott Young from TD Synnex on talking about the challenges around supply chain. As a manufacturing organization that's dependent on partnerships with other manufacturing organizations, Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of supply chain and what has changed to the supply chain during the COVID pandemic, and if you have any predictions for the future of supply chain?
Thank you. Supply chain is affected everything that we consume pretty much in America and probably across the entire world. From a manufacturer's perspective, I will give some props to an individual inside of Seal Shield. We were fortunate to bring him on a few years back, but he's a Sigma 6 lean trained professional. And Seal Shield was really in an amazing position when we hit the pandemic because he was part of our team. But as a company, we're manufacturing, all of our IP is here in the United States. We manufacture, though, in multiple countries. A number of products are manufactured in Asia as well. So it really, not only the supply chain, but the whole logistics and are all put into play, trying to get multiple products and inventory here in the United States to fulfill a just-in-time kind of a three-tier distribution channel. So in the beginning, we were in a good space, and I think we were able to answer a lot of the demand, the pent-up demand, because of some of the things that we were doing and expecting the expectations of growth of the company. But what quickly happened, we found out, one of the inside of one of our main products, our stable, is a keyboard that has an IC chip in it. That's the same chip that goes in a thermometer. Well, guess what? Everyone wanted thermometers starting March, and the spike on them went crazy. And in Asia, it was actually, they started labeling products as, the most important. And if you're going into a thermometer or some type of first response, you were getting priority type of allocation. So keyboards and mice, they kind of fell behind. But again, due to an incredible team that Seal Shield had, the legal crew got on, and we went and petitioned the country of China and let them know just how important the keyboards and mice that we were making and those IC chips were going. And we kind of ended up into a second level of prioritization. But what we've seen is just an unstable market, and the costs just completely, sometimes unrealistically, being pumped up, whether it's just freight, time, tariffs, cost of goods across the board, on every component level. They're constrained, you can't get them in. And then you can't really trust the most trusted of carriers, the FedExes, UPSs, DHLs. They're only as good as what they heard on the other end. And, the old days of guaranteeing a UPS red order before 10:30, I'd be scared to do any of that. But, it's been a long 2 years. We've been in a decent position. And I think we put ourselves in a good position that some of our competitors are even coming to us for some of the allocated electronic components out there.
That's right. When we talk about changes, certainly we've had to make changes as a result to the supply chain as a result of COVID-19. And you mentioned Six Sigma Lean, and that's been the best practice process for operations. But that's part of the problem. If you're lean and there's a hiccup, you've got a problem. And as you mentioned early on, we significantly increased our production rates on the front end and raised our inventory levels to address the shortage of components and the delayed delivery times that you've mentioned. So a lot of big changes on the supply chain, and we're optimistic that this year some of that will start to level out. But we'll just have to wait and see. Talk to us a little bit about another big issue here at Seal Shield, and I know with employers around the country, the labor market. And in our experience, we've never seen anything like this labor market. What kind of changes have impacted you in our business?
Yeah, there's never been a time like this, Bradley. I think you can go out and pull the stats, but people are changing jobs at a rate they've never done before in the past. And I do feel like the the last 2 years have kind of put everybody into that type of mindset where, they're making some type of major changes in their life during this pandemic. I even personally, we built a home. We had bought this property 5 years prior, and we weren't even gonna, we were gonna do it later on during retirement. And there we were a year into being quarantined in the house, and we're just, next we threw the house up on Zillow and sold our house and started building another one with no place to go and live. But you asked me about the job market. So everyone's changing jobs. I do feel like we're in a neat place, Seal Shield being a company that's focused on infection prevention. And I think people look for causes and communities to join. So we've been fortunate that we've gotten some great people, especially in the front end of the pandemic. But, we've also lost a few folks because people are making changes. But what I'm seeing in the marketplace, people are looking for jobs, but there's a ton of them out there, and good people are always hard to find. The best strategy is to, once you've got them, to keep them happy. So I feel like we do a decent job of that here. But the labor pool, it's a tough one today, and it's a tough one to get in front of. Especially, now it's a little bit different, but in the beginning, we grew 50% of our company. We went from a 30 something person to almost a 51 person company in a matter of a year. But you couldn't do like an in-person interview. You couldn't go and have dinner with somebody just to see if they're really a cultural fit in your company. So, some of those traditional things, we had to put in some new tools and get creative, how you can learn who somebody is. Been successful at that. But I say overall, it's a neat time to be out there as a job seeker, I think. I think there's a lot of great opportunity out there, and it makes it a very competitive world for someone like us. But I will put a plug in. We're always looking to grow and looking for good people that fit in our amazing culture.
Well, this is something that I'm very passionate about as well. And I think it's very interesting. All of these things are going to result in inflation, right? Our costs are going up, the cost of labor is going up, but there is some potential benefit for the workers in the marketplace that companies, if they want to attract and retain good people, have to treat them well. And that means that wages will go up this year. Of course, that's inflationary. Benefits are improving. Of course, there's cost associated with that. But, there are some positive impacts, I think, to the labor force as a result of the labor shortages and the demand for good workers. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and what kind of long-term ramifications there are in the labor market, certainly here in the US. And as a tie-in, sort of a segue to this, Scott, you've been at Seal Shield for 15 years. That is almost unheard of in almost in any industry, much less the IT and healthcare space. Why have you stuck around so long?
There's nowhere else I'm going after working here. We have something special. The asylums the inmates run the asylum, as my good friend likes to say. Everyone is an owner inside of Seal Shield, and therefore every voice is heard. And we really are a tight knit, functional team. There's no fat in the organization. Everyone's got a purpose and a role, and it is as important as everybody else's. And it's a family, as much a community family. Not looking for another spot. Never have been. But
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. One thing on the labor side, the one big point I didn't, that's out there that the world, we changed, and is that the bringing folks, to a virtual or semi-virtual world, turning spare bedrooms into offices. And, there's really neat ways to do that stuff. There's good ways and there's some bad ways. And That is something, a big factor that has happened here with the job force.
And I think to that point, many organizations have had to figure this out on their own. There's been some mixed messaging and some changes to the messaging recently in terms of guidelines for employees. We have our policies that we put in place at the onset of the pandemic for virtual and hybrid working, for testing. We have a Q rapid test system in the office that we utilize. And then now the CDC comes along and has changed the guidelines. I know many find it confusing. Let's talk about a little bit about those challenges and changes from a regulatory standpoint. Not a lot of us were paying attention to what some of these organizations were saying in the past. Now we're all paying attention. And it seems that sometimes the messaging is getting mixed. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I feel like the general public is frustrated on exactly that, Brad. It is mixed. It's vague at best. I think confusion and a lot of it. I don't want to point at the regulatory committees because it's not them. For the most part, I feel like our media is politically driven, and they're everything is at least touched before it comes to our ears or eyes. And but specifically around the CDC guidelines, and it just seems that that people are frustrated that it's a big flip flop and from kind of where they were, at least the last changes here. And it's really vague. I don't know when my 5 days start or when my symptoms have lessened, especially if I'm asymptomatic. And, I just, people are frustrated on exactly what am I supposed to do. I think that what we've done at Seal Shield is pretty amazing. There's a flow chart that you walk through. If you're vaccinated, you walk down this path. You've been exposed for someone direct contact, you have it. You know exactly where you've got to go. And I think the world's looking for that map. What do I do? Am I really supposed to stay home? Am I safe?
Well, I can
Are
tell
my
you,
quarantine
Scott,
messages working?
this discussion is gaining a lot of interest with the Seal Shield office staff. We have a couple of questions coming in here.
Uh-oh.
Danny Caballero wants to know, how has Seal Shield as a company adapted to the new normal?
Well, thanks, Danny. We're an example to follow, honestly. In the beginning, we used some of our own products. We used the CDC guidelines on spacing, masks, that type of thing. But one of the products that we own or that we manufacture is an electroclave, that UV disinfecting of your electronics. So our protocols were, as the employees came to work, they would come in. We had the electroclave right at the front door. They put their desks, their badge to get in the office, their phones, their keys, everything into the electroclave. It does a 60-second disinfection of all of their electronics. Meanwhile, there's a handheld thermometer inside of each box. So they take out the clean thermometer, they test themselves. If they get a passing grade, they're able to come through the door, collect their belongings and come through the door. Once those have been disinfected, inside of the door, they disinfect their hands. We utilize, again, waterproof, washable common touch electronics in the office, keyboards, mice. The screens are all protected with antimicrobial and washable film. So everything in the place is able to be disinfected. We had a daily disinfection service hired for the office. More recently, as you mentioned, we put in the testing, the day immediate testing for COVID, and the protocols on positive tests. So,
and some other big changes when we moved into this new office a few years ago. Unlike when you and I came out in the industry and we were all in our cubicles, collaborative workspaces were very in vogue. So we designed this office as a collaborative workspace. Well, of course, when COVID happened, all the collaborative workspace went out the window. We actually expanded into a second office so that we could have more space between our employees. And we're looking for a larger office space right now to accommodate that as well. So a lot of changes I'm sure other companies are experiencing. As you mentioned, we started as a primarily a virtual workforce, and then when we established our office here in Orlando, we really grew and developed that office. Well, now we've gone back to a hybrid workforce, and we've implemented policies this year allowing our in-house office workers to work virtually from home in a hybrid manner, at least one day a week. And these are policies that all came about directly as a result of these changes from COVID-19. So thank you, Danny, for that question. I do have another question from the Orlando Seal Shield office, and that is, what are you doing today to help fight the Great Resignation in both hiring and retention? So we talked a little bit about the labor market and the challenges and treating people right. How do you respond to the Great Resignation question, hiring and retention?
So we, a couple of years back, for a small company, we got in front of this, and many company, or most companies of 30 people, do not have a VP of HR. But we started back then. We put an HR director or HR VP in place. And we do realize the importance of getting the right people in and then retaining them. So the Great Resignation, I can't say it hasn't even hit us, because we have lost a couple of great folks over time. But I think if you look at the numbers, it's probably 5x of the great people that we've been able to bring in. And it's really the culture that you create. That's how you retain employees, and listening to them and continually changing. Your culture isn't a piece of stone that you go point to the vision statement or the mission statement on the wall. It's something that evolves with the people and how their sentiment moves as a group. So I think that is, being in touch with them and listening to every person and giving them all a voice is how you keep good employees.
And you touched on it before. Here at Seal Shield, we really do have a unique culture, and every employee here has an equity stake in the company, so they're all owners. They all participate in profit sharing. We have world-class benefits. We're pretty obsessed with attracting and retaining the best people, and appreciate some of those best people sending those questions in here today. Scott, we are out of time, but before we go, I've got one more question for you. Your prediction for the Super Bowl.
So my prediction is influenced by a bet that I made at HIMS. I put $50 on the Rams at 30-1 odds. So I'm looking for the Rams, Brad.
Good luck. All right. Well, you heard it here first. The Rams to win the Super Bowl. My guest today has been Scott Filion, the Chief Commercial Officer here at Seal Shield. It's been my great pleasure to have you on the show today, Scott. Join us next week when Dr. Kreitenberg will be joining us to talk about ultraviolet technology, UV radiation, and how it can be used to combat pathogens. That's next week on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Be sure to join us then. Until next time, I'm Brad Whitchurch, reminding you to keep it clean.